The air pressed cold against Sarah Carter's skin as she walked the empty road, her breath rising in pale clouds beneath the swollen moon. The abandoned farmhouse loomed on the hill, its broken windows watching like hollow eyes. For decades no one dared to cross its rotting porch, yet tonight rumors spread like wildfire. Someone had seen a woman move inside. Michael Hayes followed behind, his voice tight as he said, "You believe any of this?" Sarah shook her head but quickened her steps. The scream came sudden and jagged, tearing through the silence with a wet, choking terror that made her blood freeze. It didn't echo like an animal cry, but like someone dying slowly in the dark. A dragging noise followed, wood groaning, weight scraping across the warped floorboards. The air tasted metallic, sharp with the scent of blood. Then, from the yawning doorway, a whisper slid into the night. It carried her name, low and deliberate, as if the house itself spoke it. The silence stretched unnaturally after the whisper, broken only by Sarah's racing heartbeat. Michael gripped her arm, his face pale. "Someone's inside," he said, though his voice cracked as if doubting the words. Sarah shook free, staring at the house as if it breathed. The windows were lifeless holes, but something shifted behind them, too fluid to be human. A chill ran through her spine, settling like ice in her chest. The farmhouse had been empty since before she was born, yet she felt watched, measured, as though her steps had been expected. She whispered, "Why my name?" Michael swallowed hard, unwilling to step closer. The weight of the past clung to the place, every board creaking under secrets buried in dust and silence. Fear thickened the air, heavy and suffocating, but retreat felt impossible. Sarah stepped forward despite the icy dread, each board groaning beneath her weight as though the house objected. Michael hissed, "Don't go in," his hand hovering at her sleeve but never pulling her back. The night grew heavier, the silence unnatural, thick enough to choke. The broken door sagged inward, its hinges rusted, its frame scarred. The smell hit first, rot mingled with iron, clinging to her tongue. Shadows writhed in corners, shapes hinting at figures that vanished when she focused. Sarah whispered, "It feels alive." Michael cursed softly under his breath, fear giving way to something sharper. Anger, perhaps at the house or at himself. The farmhouse seemed to lean closer, its frame groaning, as though waiting to devour her. Inside, the air was thick and damp, and every breath scraped like dust. The hallway stretched long, lined with peeling wallpaper and broken picture frames. Sarah's shoes sank into soft, warped boards, each step echoing louder than expected. Michael hovered at the threshold, refusing to enter, his jaw set tight. "This isn't right," he muttered. Sarah's eyes caught movement in the corner, faint and fleeting, a woman's shape dissolving into the walls. She blinked, but nothing remained except the whisper of cloth, dragging against wood. She said, "I saw her." Michael's face hardened with disbelief, but his trembling hands betrayed him. The house groaned, wood snapping deep inside, as if shifting under its own weight. A sharp sound split the silence, something falling upstairs, heavy enough to rattle dust from the ceiling. Sarah gasped, her head snapping toward the staircase at the end of the hall. Michael cursed under his breath, finally stepping inside, though each motion was stiff with fear. The staircase sagged, splintering under its own age, yet above it echoed soft footsteps, too measured to belong to rats. "She's here," Sarah whispered, her voice a tremor. Michael shook his head, muttering, "Or something wants us to think she is." The floor shifted beneath them, a slow groan that seemed more like breathing than wood. Dust spiraled in faint beams of light, each mote moving as if stirred by unseen hands. The farmhouse groaned as if it resented their intrusion, the boards straining like ribs under pressure. Sarah's chest tightened as she whispered, "It knows we're here." Michael shook his head, his voice low and sharp, "Don't give it power." Yet his eyes darted at every shadow. A sudden draft slid through the hall, carrying the faint scent of roses long dead. Sarah clutched her coat tighter, trembling as a voice drifted from upstairs, muffled and female, speaking words that didn't belong to any living tongue. Michael's jaw clenched. "There's someone else in here," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. The silence that followed was worse, dense and heavy, pressing against their ears until Sarah thought she might scream just to break it. The front door creaked open suddenly, and both spun toward it. A figure stepped inside, tall, weathered, carrying a lantern that sputtered against the dark. His voice was rough, layered with years of smoke and silence. "You shouldn't be here." Sarah's heart lurched, her fear colliding with confusion. Michael demanded, "Who the hell are you?" The man's eyes, gray and hollow, scanned the walls as if expecting them to bleed. "Some things don't want to be disturbed," he said, his lantern trembling slightly. Sarah felt her knees weaken. "What do you mean?" she asked, though part of her feared the answer. The stranger's lips curled into something between warning and pity. "This house never lets go of what it takes." The stranger leaned against the rotting wall, his lantern casting twisted shadows that seemed to move on their own. "They said she left," he murmured, "but I saw her dragged, screaming through that door." Sarah's throat closed as the words sank in, her body chilled. Michael muttered, "You're insane," yet his voice cracked. The stranger's gaze burned through the dim light. "You heard her, didn't you?" Sarah stiffened, remembering the whisper of her name. Michael's face paled, his denial silent this time. The stranger sighed. "The house calls to the living. It feeds on the curious." His voice was ragged with something heavier than fear. Sarah's hands trembled, the truth pressing like iron against her chest. Thunder cracked outside, shaking dust from the rafters, and Sarah flinched. Michael forced a brittle laugh. "Ghost stories, that's all this is." But his eyes betrayed him, wide and bloodshot. The stranger stepped closer, lantern light flickering across his gaunt face. "You don't believe? Then explain why her blood still stains the floor upstairs." Sarah's stomach turned, nausea twisting with dread. Michael's jaw set, his denial faltering. "People lie," he muttered. The stranger's expression hardened. "Not the dead." The house groaned as if in agreement, the boards trembling under their feet. Sarah pressed back against the wall, her breath shallow, feeling as though invisible hands reached through the air to clutch her throat. The stranger lowered his lantern, the flames sputtering, and his voice dropped to a whisper. "Once you hear her voice, she never stops calling." Sarah's blood ran cold, every hair on her body prickling. Michael shook his head violently. "We're leaving now." But the farmhouse shuddered at his words, floorboards shifting as if alive, cutting off the doorway behind them. Sarah gasped, grabbing Michael's arm, while the stranger only closed his eyes as though he expected it. A soft voice echoed again, faint but clear, a woman's tone wrapping Sarah's name like silken steel. She clamped her hands over her ears, but it sank straight through, piercing deeper than sound should. The stranger's eyes opened slowly. Too late. The farmhouse's breathless silence pressed on Sarah's chest, as though the walls themselves leaned closer. The stranger's lantern flickered, shadows shifting like living things across the peeling wallpaper. Sarah whispered, "She's still here, isn't she?" The stranger's eyes held hers for a moment before dropping to the floor. "She never left." Michael's hands curled into fists, denial carving lines into his face. "You're trying to scare us." Yet the quiver in his voice betrayed him. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked with measured weight, followed by the faint dragging sound again. Sarah's skin prickled, fear knotting deep in her stomach. "It's moving," she breathed, as if her words might summon it closer. The stranger raised a trembling hand toward the ceiling, murmuring, "That's where it began." They climbed the stairs, each step moaning beneath their weight, dust spiraling in weak beams of moonlight. Sarah gripped the railing, wood splintering under her palm. Michael muttered, "This place should have collapsed years ago." The stranger walked behind them, his lantern glow painting the walls in sickly gold. The sound of dragging grew louder, punctuated by a low thud, steady as a heartbeat. Sarah's stomach knotted as she whispered, "It's waiting for us." Michael shook his head violently. "No, it's just old boards, just..." His voice faltered, his denial unraveling as another step above creaked under invisible weight. They reached the landing, the air colder than below, each breath turning visible, as if the house inhaled their fear. At the top, the hallway stretched long and narrow, lined with doors sagging on broken hinges. Sarah froze, her eyes drawn to a dark smear along the floorboards, dragging into the first room on the left. "Blood," she whispered, her voice trembling. Michael swallowed hard, sweat beading his forehead despite the cold. "Could be rust," he muttered, though he didn't sound convinced. The stranger lifted his lantern, the orange glow spilling across the smear, revealing the sticky dark trail that gleamed wetly. "No rust runs fresh," he said, his voice grim. Sarah felt her legs weaken, her body urging her to flee, yet her feet rooted in place. Somewhere beyond the door came a sigh, long and low, like a woman's breath held for years. Sarah pushed the door slowly, hinges shrieking as it revealed a small bedroom cloaked in dust. The bed was broken, mattress shredded, but the walls were worse, scrawled with desperate words in dried crimson. Michael's face twisted as he read aloud, "She never let me go." The letters dripped unevenly, as if written with trembling hands. Sarah covered her mouth, nausea rising. The stranger stood rigid, eyes hollow. "She wrote until she couldn't anymore," he whispered. A faint laugh drifted from the corner, brittle and feminine, though no one stood there. Michael staggered back, his denial shattered, his lips parting in stunned silence. Sarah's heart pounded, every instinct screaming to run, yet her body remained trapped in the pull of the room's sorrow. The laughter faded, replaced by silence sharp enough to ache. Sarah stepped closer to the wall, her hand trembling inches from the words. When the whisper came again, her name dragged out with cruel tenderness. She spun, her breath catching, but no one stood behind her. Michael's face drained of all color. "It knows you," he said, voice breaking. The stranger's lantern flickered violently, shadows stretching, swallowing the corners of the room. "It's chosen," he murmured. Sarah's throat tightened, terror clawing at her chest. The air grew colder still, the floor groaning as though something heavy shifted beneath the boards. Sarah whispered back, unable to stop herself, "What do you want?" The silence that answered was worse than the voice. Sarah backed away from the wall, her breath jagged, as Michael's hand clamped on her shoulder. His eyes burned with panic. "It wants you, not me," he spat, his voice shaking. She stared at him, stunned by his sudden distance. The stranger's gaze fell heavy on Michael. "You knew," he said softly, suspicion curdling his tone. Michael's face twisted with denial. "I didn't know, I just—" His words faltered. Sarah's stomach churned, the truth threading through his trembling stance. The farmhouse groaned again, louder, as if feeding on the tension. Sarah whispered, "You brought me here." Michael avoided her eyes, his silence more damning than confession. The lantern flickered, and the shadows crept closer, wrapping them in suffocating dark. The silence broke with a whisper curling from the far corner, soft and mocking. Sarah froze, her pulse hammering. Michael whispered harshly, "It's her." The stranger's jaw tightened, his lantern swinging to reveal only empty space. The whisper grew louder, words sliding into laughter. Sarah felt her skin crawl, every syllable cutting into her bones. The laughter twisted into sobs, echoing through the walls, until it felt as though the whole house wept. Michael backed toward the door, panic etched in his features. "We need to leave," he muttered. The stranger shook his head grimly. "There's no leaving until she decides." Sarah's throat tightened, the sobs rising until they drowned her thoughts, a chorus of grief clawing through the air. Sarah pressed her palms to her ears, but the sobbing sank deeper, filling her head. She shouted, "Stop!" and the sound ceased instantly, leaving silence sharp and hollow. Michael stared at her as though she had control. "Why does it listen to you?" he demanded, his voice jagged. Sarah's lips trembled, her body trembling with the same question. The stranger's eyes narrowed. "Because she called her name." The house heard. Sarah shook her head, fear spilling into anger. "I didn't ask for this." Michael's voice cracked into a laugh that held no humor. "Maybe you were meant for it." The farmhouse groaned louder, as if pleased, dust cascading from the ceiling. Sarah's fury collapsed back into raw terror. The stranger stepped forward, his voice breaking. "I tried once. I tried to free her." Sarah's eyes widened as he lifted his sleeve, revealing scars etched deep into his arm. Michael cursed under his breath, eyes darting toward the door as if already planning to flee. The stranger continued, "The house doesn't release what it claims. It consumes." Sarah whispered, "Then why are we still breathing?" His lantern dimmed, his face shadowed. "Because it's choosing." Michael's panic flared into anger, his voice sharp. "I'm not dying for this place." He shoved Sarah aside, his movements desperate. She stumbled, catching herself on the wall, her heart cracking under the betrayal written in his eyes. The betrayal solidified in Sarah's chest as Michael edged toward the doorway, muttering, "She can have you, not me." Her breath caught, grief tangling with terror. The stranger's eyes burned with fury. "Coward!" he spat, stepping toward Michael, but the house silenced him with a groan so loud the walls trembled. The floor split open near the bed, a jagged crack yawning wide, exhaling the stench of rot and earth. Sarah screamed, stumbling back as shadows poured out, writhing like smoke alive. Michael froze, his escape cut short, terror painted across his face. Sarah's name slipped again from the darkness, low and hungry. She clutched her chest, her mind splintering under the weight of the sound. The house had chosen. The crack widened, belching cold air that stank of soil and blood. Sarah stumbled backward, clutching her chest as whispers slithered through the dark. Michael shouted, "It's not real!" Yet his voice shook. Shadows curled upward, shaping into something almost human, almost familiar. The stranger's lantern flared, casting violent light that revealed a woman's form, face pale, eyes hollow, lips dripping with crimson. Sarah gasped. "She's the one they saw." The figure tilted its head, grin stretching too wide. Michael stammered, No, this isn't." The floor shook, dust raining from the ceiling. The figure whispered Sarah's name again, her voice cruel and soft. Sarah's knees buckled under the sound, her breath torn from her lungs like a prayer. The figure stepped closer, her movement unnaturally fluid, feet dragging as though chains bound her. Sarah's voice cracked, "You're not alive." The woman's lips twisted, voice pouring like honey laced with venom. "Alive enough." Michael's hand trembled as he pointed at her, muttering, "This is impossible." The stranger shook his head. "She's not the woman anymore. She's what the house made her." The figure's gaze locked on Sarah, her face warping between sorrow and malice. Sarah's heart thrashed, every instinct begging her to run, yet her body felt anchored. The house vibrated, floor groaning like lungs. Michael's voice rose to a scream, "Don't listen!" But Sarah couldn't close her ears. The whisper already lived inside her bones. The figure's smile widened as she stepped into the lantern's glow, revealing scars etched deep into her arms and throat. Sarah gagged, tears burning her eyes. "She suffered here," she whispered. The stranger's voice cracked. "She still suffers." Michael staggered back, hitting the wall, sweat dripping down his temples. "We need to get out." But the doorway behind him slammed shut, boards snapping into place as if nailed by unseen hands. Sarah screamed, panic breaking free. The figure laughed, low and guttural, the sound rattling the glass shards in the window. "You're already part of me," she said, her words splitting Sarah's mind with jagged edges. Michael pounded against the sealed door, each blow useless, echoing his despair. The stranger stepped between Sarah and the figure, raising his lantern though his hand shook. "You won't take her," he growled, though his voice carried more desperation than strength. The figure leaned forward, her lips twisting. "You failed once already." Sarah's eyes darted to him, confusion piercing through terror. "You tried to save her." His silence confirmed it, shame darkening his features. Michael screamed, "None of this matters, just get us out." The house answered with a deep groan, walls bowing inward as dust fell like rain. The figure raised her arms, shadows rising behind her like wings. Sarah clutched her coat, sobbing as the whispers multiplied, voices layering until the air itself throbbed with anguish. The shadows surged, swallowing the lantern's light, until only the woman's pale grin glowed. Sarah's heart thundered as her name echoed from every direction, each whisper sharper than a blade. She fell to her knees, clutching her ears, but the sound tunneled deeper. Michael slammed against the walls, screaming, "Let us out!" His desperation turned raw, each strike weaker. The stranger reached for Sarah, his voice ragged. "Don't answer her." But the figure leaned close, her voice curling into Sarah's ear like fire and ice. "You've always been mine." Sarah sobbed, her body trembling, as the floor split wider beneath them. From the abyss below rose not emptiness, but countless hands clawing, reaching, desperate to drag her down. The house shook violently, dust pouring like ash from the ceiling. Sarah clung to the floor, her nails scraping wood as ghostly hands clawed upward from the crack. Michael screamed, swinging his fists at the shadows, but they passed through as if striking smoke. The stranger gripped Sarah's arm, pulling her toward him, shouting, "Fight it!" The woman's pale face loomed above, her lips curling into an endless grin. Sarah cried out, "Why me?" The voice echoed from every wall, answering in unison, "Because you heard me." The boards groaned louder, splitting wider beneath them, a void stretching into nothing. Sarah's body trembled as her name poured from the abyss in 1,000 broken whispers. The lantern sputtered, flames nearly extinguished, plunging the room into near blackness. Sarah screamed as a hand brushed her ankle, icy and strong, dragging her closer to the crack. Michael grabbed her, pulling back with wild strength. "Don't let go," he shouted, his voice raw. The stranger thrust the lantern toward the shadows, light flaring briefly, forcing the hands to recoil. The woman shrieked, a sound both human and monstrous, shaking the windows until glass rained down. Sarah sobbed, her voice fractured. "It wants me to go with it." Michael growled. "Then fight, damn it." His face was pale with terror, but his grip was iron. The house groaned deeper, the walls bending inward like a ribcage closing. The woman's body stretched unnaturally, her limbs bending like shadows, her face flickering between beauty and rot. She hissed, "Stay, Sarah," the words drenched in hunger. Sarah shook her head violently, tears streaming. "I'm not yours." The hands surged higher, grasping her wrists and waist. The stranger lunged forward, trying to sever them with his lantern's iron frame, but the flame dimmed again. Michael shouted in despair, "It won't stop." His voice cracked as the boards beneath his feet splintered. Sarah screamed, her body torn between two worlds, the living and the abyss. The house trembled harder, each wall buckling as if it might collapse, but instead it seemed to draw them deeper inside its belly. Michael's grip faltered as a shadow coiled around his chest, dragging him back. He roared, thrashing wildly, his eyes wild with terror. Sarah reached out, screaming his name, but the woman's grin widened. "He was never yours," she whispered, her words dripping venom. The stranger shouted, "She feeds on betrayal." Sarah's heart shattered as Michael cried, "Help me," before the shadow yanked him toward the darkness. Sarah lunged forward, but the stranger seized her, holding her back. "If you follow, you're lost," he warned, his voice trembling with anguish. Sarah's sob broke through the roar of the house, her body torn between saving him and surviving. The void swallowed Michael's scream, leaving only silence. The house stilled for a heartbeat, silence pressing so heavily, Sarah thought her ears had ruptured. Then the floor exploded with a violent crack, the abyss yawning wide, swallowing what remained of the bed and wall. Sarah clutched the stranger as debris rained around them. The ghostly woman towered, her form now monstrous, her face a mask of shifting horrors. "You belong to me," she hissed, her voice layered with countless others. Sarah screamed back, "I'm not yours." The stranger thrust the lantern into the chasm, flames erupting in a desperate blaze. Shadows writhed, screaming as the light seared them. Sarah's body shook violently, caught between collapse and escape, as the house itself roared in rage. The blaze from the lantern burned bright, forcing the shadows back, but the house screamed in fury, walls cracking open like wounds. Sarah clung to the stranger, her voice breaking. "We can't hold it." The ghostly woman towered above, her face shifting between countless identities, everyone twisted with grief and rage. Michael's scream still echoed faintly from the void, a reminder of the house's hunger. The stranger shouted over the roar, "The light can't last. You must choose, stay and be taken, or fight until the house breaks." Sarah's body trembled, terror locking her lungs, but rage began to kindle inside. Her whisper cut through the noise. "I won't belong to you." The woman's smile faltered, if only for a moment. The floor buckled, splitting wider, exposing a cavern of writhing shadows beneath. Sarah staggered back, her breath ragged. The ghostly woman's voice filled every corner. "You are mine. You were always mine." The stranger shoved Sarah behind him, defiance burning in his weary eyes. "Not while I still breathe," he growled, raising the lantern higher. The flame blazed one last time, bursting into a violent storm of fire. The woman shrieked, her form unraveling into threads of smoke. Sarah's hands covered her ears, but the scream drilled into her skull. The house convulsed, beams snapping, ceiling raining plaster. "Run!" the stranger shouted, pushing Sarah toward the doorway as the floor collapsed in a roar of chaos and hunger. Sarah ran, stumbling through the shaking hallway as plaster and wood crashed around her. The stranger followed close, lantern sputtering, its flame now a fragile ember. Behind him, the woman's laughter rose again, faint but relentless, echoing through the splintering walls. Sarah gasped. "She isn't gone." The stranger's voice broke. "She never leaves." The staircase ahead split in two, forcing Sarah to leap across a yawning gap. She landed hard, pain jolting through her legs, but she kept moving, driven by survival. The house bent inward, pulling them deeper with every step. Sarah's body screamed for her to stop, but she pushed forward, tears streaking her face as she whispered to herself, "I won't die here." They burst through the front hall as the house convulsed violently, doors slamming shut, windows shattering into rain-like shards. Sarah reached for the exit, only to find it sealed, boards nailed across by unseen hands. She screamed, slamming her fists against the wood. The stranger lifted his lantern, voice raw. "It wants you to stay." Sarah spun toward him, tears streaking her dirt-stained cheeks. "Then it'll have to kill me." The boards shuddered, groaning as cracks split across them. The ghostly woman's whisper slid between the cracks, soft as silk. "You already belong to me." Sarah roared back, pounding harder, until the boards finally snapped, a burst of icy air flooding the hall. Sarah burst through the broken doorway, collapsing onto the cold ground outside. The night air cut sharp, her lungs burning as she gasped. The farmhouse loomed behind her, groaning like a dying beast, yet its windows flickered with a pale light. The stranger stumbled out beside her, blood dripping from his arm, his lantern finally extinguished. Sarah whispered, "It's over." But the house silence was not peace, it was waiting. From an upstairs window the pale face appeared again, lips stretched into a silent grin. Sarah's blood froze as she realized it wasn't the woman's face anymore. It was her own. The whisper carried across the wind, soft, deliberate, calling her name again.